when something emotionally disturbing happens to you, then your sort of body, mind, psyche gets disturbed. And the restimulation part is that something happens in the present that reminds you of a distressing experience in the past. And that sort of triggers, you might say, instead of restimulation, triggers a response that you did in the past that was at least useful enough that you survived into the present, but it might not be appropriate for the present. Very simple example, if you're a little kid and a big dog runs up at you and barks at you and you're really scared. And so you cringe and start to cry or something. Okay, in the present, you may have this irrational fear of dogs, even if they're little yappy chihuahuas or whatever they are. You're like, you don't like dogs. Get me away from dogs. That's an irrational response. So the emotional restimulation causes you to perceive dogs as threatening. And you could say that in your state of being conscious of this dog, there's also the emotional valence of being threatening. Now, other people might see the same dog and feel, oh, peaceful, happy, nice dog. So there's this emotional fringe around what you're actually conscious of in the moment. Somebody on one side of a dispute has this firm conviction that they're right. And somebody on the other side of the dispute has firm conviction that they're right and the other side's wrong. And it's like, it's based on an emotional reaction, and there's certainly rationalizations behind it. But the issue is that these things aren't amenable to reason. You can't go to the Taliban guy and say, "Oh, you really shouldn't kill your daughter because that's wrong." He says, "No, it's not wrong. It's absolutely right. It's my obligation." Well, how do you tell somebody, no, that's not your obligation? I mean, you can say that. How do you convince them? This I see this all over the place. I mentioned abortion. Currently, this whole thing is, some people say, get vaccinated because you're killing people if you don't, because you're walking around spreading germs and such. And other people say, no, it's my right to govern my body. Now, it's interesting as an aside, the people that firmly say this is my body and it's my right to do with it what I will, don't extend that same line of thought to women who want to have control over their bodies when they're pregnant. That's not rational. You can't reason somebody out of their moral claim. It's at a deeper level than philosophers come up with utilitarianism or Kantian deontology or whatever. We'll figure it out rationally. That's fine. You can figure stuff out rationally, but that's not what motivates people. What motivates people is and this goes back to Damasio, every instance of being conscious, there's elements of cognition and perception and emotion. They're all mixed together. So I guess my point was that there's these intractable bits here of people having conflict. And how do we figure out what's really going on? Want to hear a funny story? When I was little, like 5 or 6 or something, just learning to read, I went to my mother. Mommy, why do they put cigars on cereal? She goes, what? Why do they put cigar on the cereal? Cigar, S-U-G-A-R.
Yeah.
Marx's book, and I actually read it and actually wrote a review of it someplace. He wants to do away with the concept of morality. Says morality as such, first of all, it doesn't exist. It's only a fiction, okay? And we are seduced by this fiction into thinking that's this important thing, and all it does is get us to fight with each other with all these attributes of intransigence and so forth. So in the literature, this is called moral anti-realism. The idea is that moral concepts such as rights and obligations and moral laws and duties and such aren't real. They're certainly not real in the sense of, I can pick up my phone that just rang and bothered us here a minute ago. And that's real. Everybody can see there's a phone there. Sure enough, we can hear it ring. If I say my duty is to protect the sanctity of life and not let anybody have an abortion, and somebody else says it's my duty to protect the integrity of the human freedom of choice, how do you adjudicate? There's nothing out there to say. You can't both look at some moral law. Oh yeah, this is the moral law. Oh yeah, we got it wrong. That's not the moral law. There's nothing out there to do that with. So that's the position that known as moral anti-realism. In this essay, I sort of adopt that position, but I attempt to show that there is a sense in which there is a reality to morality, but it's not what we think. I call this the ontology of morality. In what manner do moral entities exist? There's a certain way of being, a manner of being that's peculiar to physical objects. there's a different manner of being that's peculiar to logical and numerical objects. And there's yet another manner of being that pertains to moral objects. And those are, we'll say farther down the line, they are, I want to say, intersubjectively constituted, or they're social realities. They're not physical realities. They're not logical, numerical realities. They're social realities. Yuval Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, calls them fictions. Well, they are fictions in a way. Like, here's a piece of paper. I don't have it, but I do have. Here's a piece of look. Here's some money. Here's a U.S. $1 bill. Okay. Now it's a physical object. It's got a certain shape and a certain size and some colors, and it's physical. I can't magically push my finger through it. And just as a piece of paper, what could you do with a piece of paper? Well, you could get a lot of them, paper your walls, and you can make origami out of it or whatever. But that's not how we use it. We use it as a store of value that I can trade this for a candy bar or whatever $1 buys this day, which is not much. And that's a social reality, not a physical reality. The person who claims that, you're a moral relativist, or moral relativism is wrong or evil in some way, they're coming from a moral position. And they think that they have the correct view of what morality is. And they say, well, if you're a moral relativist and you're in a society where it's okay to, let's say, abandon deformed children out on a hillside and let them die rather than let them grow up and be nurtured, they'll say, even though the people in that society think it's morally okay, but they're wrong, because I've got the true answer. And if some so-called moral relativist, whatever that is, says, oh no, it's right in that community, they'll go, well, that can't be right, because how can it be right in that community and wrong in my community? Isn't there something that makes it right? And those people in that community just don't perceive it properly or something. The moral relativism is pejorative, but it's a way of claiming that the speaker's morality is the one true morality, and the moral relativist just got it all wrong. Now, in this essay, I don't use the term moral relativism. I use the term social construction. Let's take this ancient Greek society where a deformed infant is left out to die. Within that society, everybody thinks that that's not only okay, that's really obligatory. Recently read a very interesting book called The Bee Makers, a work of fiction. You ought to check that out. There was a young girl and her brother was sort of deformed. He kind of looked like a goat. He had little bumps on his head and his one foot was stunted or something. So they were going to kill him. And there's this whole thing about how he got saved and so forth. But the idea is that in that society, people thought that not only that was an okay thing to do, they thought that was the right thing to do. And in our society, of course, we go, we don't do that. It'd be awful. Okay. So the point about this moral anti-realism thing is there's no universally objectively right answer when you're in the realm of morality. I mean, you're in the realm of what I call the rightness paradigm. If you're trying to figure out how to govern your own life, how to tell people or advise people how to lead their lives and so forth. The rightness paradigm is basically a moral realist position. It says there really are right things and wrong things and laws that determine whether they're right or wrong. There really are obligations and duties and so forth. And they're out there, even though we can't perceive them in the same way that we perceive physical objects. And the point of Marx and other moral anti-realists is A, it's not true, and B, it's a terrible way to live your life because it just leads to conflict, just more and more conflict. Because if somebody's morally persuaded that abortion is wrong, and if somebody else is morally persuaded that abortion is unpleasant but it's not morally wrong, and it's what's really important is the right of a woman to govern her own body, there's no middle ground. That morality taken as something that objectively exists in the manner of or analogous to physical reality, A, it's an untenable position, and B, it's got terrible consequences. Yeah, some practices in other cultures seem to us to be morally repugnant. The obvious worst example in that list of things was the Taliban guy who's going to kill his daughter because she went out of sight with a young man. Who knows what they would have done over there. So we think it's morally repugnant. And so the problem is when you're thinking in terms of right and wrong, when you're in what I call the rightness paradigm, there's no easy way out. You can, by force, go and dominate the the country where these people do these things and make them stop doing it, but that doesn't change their minds. That we're still in this rightness paradigm, this moralistic paradigm where there's just intransigent conflict. Later on in the essay, I suggest a whole nother way of looking at ethics. And I want to distinguish ethics from morality. But ethics is, in broad terms, how do we figure out how to live our lives and advise other people to live their lives, and how we figure out how we live together and so forth. There's another way of looking at these conflicts, and that is what I call the goodness paradigm, as opposed to rightness. The goodness paradigm is, let's look at the observable harms and benefits of certain actions or policies. Okay, so the observable harms of this Taliban guy is that the poor woman is, in the extreme case, killed, or in lesser cases, maybe maimed or oppressed in some way. Certainly not good for her. And you can argue that it's actually not good for the oppressors either. It's a long argument, but you could make that argument. And that if you could get people to understand, get people to look at the problem in terms of observable harms and benefits rather than unobservable moral laws and rules. There's another example. So in the United States, there's laws that mandate that certain insurance policies cover contraceptives, okay? Because that's good for women. If they don't want to be pregnant, it's good for them not to be pregnant. It's not even abortion. This is contraceptives. It's good for women to have a way to not be pregnant if they want to have sex. Certain Catholic institutions, and not just the churches, but a school, a Roman Catholic run school, objected to their insurance policy covering contraception because it's immoral, because God says you're not supposed to have contraception. Even though the harm of a woman's having an abortion is worse, is greater than the harm of having some way to not get pregnant in the first place. You see, so there's one way of looking at, well, which way gives us the least harm and the most benefits? Well, allow contraception. Tell people how sex works, and you won't have unwanted babies, and you won't have dangerous procedures, and dangerous to women's health and so forth. That's one way to look at it, but their way to look at it, no, it's wrong. It's just wrong. We're not going to do it. You can't make us do it, blah, blah, blah. So the whole essay, and there's in two parts. This first part is to sort of examine the nature of the ontology of morality. And then the second part is providing this alternative, which I call the goodness paradigm, which would be a better way of governing ourselves and figuring out how to act and so forth. A sort of themes to a lot of what I do is try to get precise language, because imprecision of language leads to confused thought, and confused thought leads to ineffective action and conflict and so forth. So we were talking earlier about consciousness. I don't even like to use the word consciousness because it's got so many meanings. But that's, as we say in the side, let's get into that some other time. That the precision of language is very important for me. I spent some time in being a requirements analyst for IT systems. And my job was to listen to the customers, say, hey, we want our computer system to do A, B, and C. And I would write it up in such a way that the programmers could read this. Okay, we can design a thing to do that. I had to be very precise, very unambiguous, spell everything out. Because if I didn't, somebody would interpret something one way, and that's not what the user wanted, and then we get all kinds of problems. That's sort of an aside, but that's part of my background in coming to philosophy. Well, Plato talks about the good, capital T, capital G, the good, as if it's some thing out there in Plato cyberspace, whatever it is, that exists independently of all of this stuff that's going on around us. I don't think that's a useful way to think about goodness. To me, goodness is evident in the activities, the processes, and the ongoing realities of interactions. Some things are obviously good and some things are obviously bad, in the sense that they benefit or harm whatever the entities are. An example, for some plants, lots of sunlight is good, and of course, enough water and nutrients. Other plants don't do well with lots of sunlight. They thrive much better in shade. Okay, so there's not one overarching good for plants. There's things that are good for this kind of plants, good for that kind of plants. There are things that, if I want to say Daniel is a good person. Okay, well, that basically means I approve of Daniel in some way. Well, what does it mean? You have to say, to give it some concrete meaning, you have to give more context. Daniel's good at editing. Daniel's good at interviewing. I don't know what else you're good at. Maybe you're good at skiing or snorkeling. Or I mean, I don't know. I'm just making this up. Those are things you're good at. So if I say Daniel's a good editor, well, that has more context. That means Daniel can take a piece of writing and fiddle with it and change it around such that it's more accessible to readers and so forth, that kind of thing. So goodness is not this big abstract thing. There are instances of goodness in concrete interactions, concrete processes, and so forth.
As the Platonic philosopher, my mind goes to it being a description of the imagination. When we picture the good, it's truly a function of abstraction. Mm-hmm. And so the way you're describing good here, I really like it. Actually, it does make it more concrete.
So what's more real? What's more real, the abstraction or the concrete stuff from which we abstract?
Oh, well, definitely the concrete that we abstract from, but there's a necessity that one presupposes the other. And so I think what Plato's doing is he's describing this innate foundation that we have and share. I mean, you know how philosophers love universals. In your literature, do you spend much time going into imagination or creativity?
That's a good question. I haven't written about that much, if that's what you're asking. Okay. I live with an artist who is boundlessly full of creativity and imagination, so well acquainted with it. But yeah, without the capacity to imagine, as to say, entertain in thought something other than what's right in front of us, we wouldn't be human at all. We would be, I can imagine that, there's a word, we can imagine an amoeba swimming around in some kind of fluid, and, oh, here's a tasty thing over here, and, ooh, this is a bitter thing over there, and there'd be attraction and aversion. There's probably not much mental entertaining of some notions of what's tasty and what's bitter, where to find the tastiness, how to avoid the bitterness and so forth. It's just reactions. As you go up the evolutionary scale, there's more and more ability, apparently, for plants and animals to think about their world as opposed to merely reacting about it. Yeah. Humans have that to a great capacity, and humans even have the capacity to think about themselves thinking. They can think about their own activity of thinking, think about their own ways of interacting with the world and the strategies for being in the world. So that capacity to entertain in thought something that's not immediately present is crucial, very crucial. And if that's what you mean by imagination, the scientific method is roughly frame a hypothesis, figure out a experiment that if the hypothesis is true, if you do X, you'll get Y result, then you do the experiment, observe the results. It either confirms or disconfirms your hypothesis and so forth. Very useful way to achieve knowledge of the world. How do you frame the hypothesis in the first place? That's a creative act. Well, being as we're humans trying to figure out what's in the world, what's real. Yeah. What other lens do we have?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, we could imagine some other lens. I don't know, a Martian lens or an omnipotent God lens or something. But even so, we're the ones imagining. Man, meaning human beings generally, is a measure of all things. So we've got an objective look. What is morality? Well, it has all these characteristics, which is not to say that they are morally right or wrong. They're just the characteristics of morality. There's behavioral and emotional and cognitive characteristics of it. And this business about rape and murder being considered universally wrong, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. If you're a member of a tribe of, I don't know, maybe you're a tribe of hunter-gatherers in the Amazon or in Africa or someplace, or in the plains of the North American continent several hundred years ago. And there's another tribe that you're competing with that tribe for resources. Well, it's completely immoral for you to murder one of your own tribesmen or one of your own tribespeople. It's certainly not immoral to kill one of them. It's immoral to kill us, but it's not immoral to kill them. So it's bounded. You have to look at the context. Within the context of our tribe, rape and murder are evil and wrong. Within the broader context of our tribe and their tribe, it's certainly not wrong to kill them, and it's not wrong to rape their women. In fact, that's what we do. We go out and do that stuff. So little more nuanced, but within the context, yes, what's considered right and wrong is considered to have universal applicability within that context. The context is, historically, I think, we're all, like, let's think of medieval Europe with like kings and dukes and barons are all battling each other, and it's like endless skirmishes and warfare and stuff. But that's all within the context that we're all Western European humans in Christendom. So within that context, we all agree, even though we're fighting and killing each other, we'll try not to kill civilians and we'll try not to do these other things. But if you're a Western European nation and you go down to the Congo and all these people are a whole different color, they're very darker than we are, and they have different customs, and in fact, they're not even human. Let's enslave them and make them work for us and